I live in a town in Wales, albeit not the little villages that most people imagine. My town is a pretty popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. So it started when I was around 15 years old, so about 8 years ago. I was dating a girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually get the train to hers and back. However, this one night her family weren't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was about 19 to 20, and he was pretty chill. The plan was to stay the night. We were up pretty late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never really got along with her mother, and the whole thing got pretty heated, and I was then kicked out of the house and then told that I couldn't stay over. It was about 2 a.m. and I didn't want to call my own parents and worry of waking them up, so I then began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a quarter worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home by around 3:30. So I walked along the weird concrete just above the beach, not really sure what it's called, and I stopped after about a half hour of walking, as there's a public toilet which is kind of run down but also open 24 hours, and I was really desperate. I was honestly just expecting it to be empty or just have a homeless dude sleeping in it, but I was wrong. There was some guy in there using the urinal. If I had to guess, this guy looked to be in his mid to late 50s. He was a little on the overweight side, but not extremely. He had gray messy-ish hair, but other than that, he looked pretty normal. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember that he made a quick joke about something, but I don't really remember what. I politely laughed, did my business, and left. After about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather had gotten pretty bad. It started to rain really heavy and the wind was picking up. I seem to remember that this was around November, so it was pretty cold. Anyways, so I'm walking now and a car drives by, beeps, then pulls over just in front of me. I assumed that it was someone I know but couldn't really think who. I then got to the car and it was the dude from the toilet inside of it. He asked me where I was headed and I told him. He said that was a really long walk and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in the weather. Then he offered me a lift. Now in hindsight, I probably should have refused, but the weather was really bad and at the time he wasn't really giving off any kind of weird vibes. The drive then took about 15 minutes I think, maybe 20. The more that I was in the car with him, the more I started to get vibes that there was something off about this guy. He was telling me that his best friend was a 14-year-old lad who stays over at his place a lot, and they drink together, and if I ever wanted to join, I was totally welcome to. He was also asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully remember what they were, I just remember it's the kind of questions you don't really ask someone that you're just giving a simple lift home to. Anyways, we eventually got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off over there. I told him that my house wasn't accessible by road and that I would just walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and he told me to give him a call whenever I got back to home safely, as he wanted to make sure that I got home okay. I asked him what his name was and he just told me his name was Pete. I then said, "Pete what? My phone wants a surname." He wouldn't tell me. He just kept saying,
"Just call me Pete."
I ended up later finding out that Pete was a fake name. Anyway, I got into my house and then I sent him a text letting him know that I was okay. Probably a bad decision, but to be honest, back then I was pretty full of bad decisions. The next day came and I was expecting everything to go back to normal. Well, it didn't. You want to know why? Because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. I started to get texts from him every single morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me well. I replied to the first few, but then I started ignoring them. He then started trying to ring me every single evening. I would mostly ignore his calls, but he would often repeatedly call me until I would answer. He was sending me these texts inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me that he had just gotten himself a pool table and that he wanted me to come and play it with him. He was telling me a story about a friend that he was playing pool with, and he accidentally let slip that the guy called him John. I then decided to ask him about this, and then said, I thought your name was Pete. Then he said back,
Oh no, my friend's name is John.
You just said your friend called you John, and then you told me your friend was called Tom, I said. Then he replies back with,
Oh well, some people call me John too. It's like a nickname, but his name is John as well.
He had actually hesitated while saying this, and it kind of clicked with me that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing, but he just kept asking. After a while, my mom really wanted to know who this dude was that just kept texting me and ringing me. I eventually told my mom, and she ended up calling him herself, and she told him that if he kept calling me that she was going to go to the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. You see, I had a routine, and well, he knew it. I would always walk my dog 3:30 every afternoon, and I then played with her for about 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, just near where he had dropped me off at. I started to notice his car pulling up there within about 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. His car had tinted windows, but I would always notice the car lights were always left on, and he also always left the engine running. And also, I recognized his car. I would occasionally notice the car door being left open and a large flash from that direction, as if someone was taking pictures. I started changing the time that I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure it out and start showing up either earlier or late to coincide with when I was walking her. This went on for months, and I never mentioned it to anyone, but then one day it just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. I never saw his car anymore, and I never got any messages or phone calls from him either. It all just stopped. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year and had that for another 2 years. I decided to dig out my old phone when I was around 18 to 19 after the aforementioned dog died. I turned on a phone which had been turned off for several years now and still had the old SIM in it, and that's when I got my final message from Pete. It was an odd one, and it was about 14 months old. It then said something along the lines of,
Hi. I know we haven't spoken in a really long time, but I just thought you should know that over the new year, I was diagnosed with an illness and I've been told by doctors that I don't have long left to live. You were a really good friend to me in the short time we knew each other. Here's my address. I would really appreciate it if you would come around so I can just have one last chat with you. I've got some beers, and if it gets too late, you can stay the night. Just drop me a phone call when you want to come around so that I can set everything up for you. See you soon.
I have no idea if Pete/John was genuinely ill or just trying to lure me to his house. I never went to the address, and I never responded to him or heard from him since. I didn't reply to him, and that was the last that I heard from him. So yeah, that's the story. Not tremendously exciting, but kind of a pretty big impact on me during those years. I hope you all enjoyed. When I was around 6 years old, my parents had divorced and my dad was soon given full custody, as my mom is an alcoholic and had racked up a few DUIs and such. Anyway, me, my younger sister, and my dad had moved to a new neighborhood, and we soon transferred to the nearby elementary school. The school was pretty close to my new house, maybe 5 to 7 or so blocks away. It was close enough to walk, but my sister and I were too young to walk alone. Sometimes our dad would walk us to school in the morning, then walk back, and less commonly, he'd walk to pick us up. Most of the time he picked us up in his black Mazda. The way that pickups worked at my school was pretty common. We went out with our class, stood by our teacher and classmates, and when a car pulled up, the designated staff members would ask who the student was that they were picking up, then go find them with their class, then escort them to the car. Seeing as my mom was in jail at this time, the only person who ever really picked us up was my dad. One day I was in 3rd grade and my sister was in 1st. We were waiting outside to be picked up by my dad. After being outside for only a few minutes, My sister came over to me and she said someone who wasn't our dad was in a car to pick us up. He'd said both of our names and he found my sister first. She said that he'd smiled at her and told her that our dad had told him to pick us up that afternoon, but she said that she wanted to find me first before she got in the car since she didn't recognize him. And thank God she did that. Our dad had always told us not to ever talk to strangers, so I grabbed my teacher and I told her what happened. She got a really alarmed look on her face and she told us to stay where we were while she told another teacher or something. Our dad arrived to pick us up a couple of minutes later and we got home safely. We then told him all about it and we all had a really long talk about safety protocol. He asked my sister to describe the man in the car, and then he called the police and gave them the best description that he could, although my sister was very young and wasn't very focused on important details like that. A few weeks later, and it happened yet again. Only this time he said my name. My dad had given the school the same info that he'd given the police, but presumably he must have had multiple vehicles, because my sister said that he'd been in a red car and this one was black, very similar to my dad's. I saw the black car and ran up to it, but luckily I caught a glimpse of the face before I opened the door and hopped in. He was middle-aged, really pale, and with a really angular face. We made eye contact and his mouth was smiling, but his eyes looked really wrong to me. It was like they were squinty and almost angry. I then turned back towards the carpool assistant who delivered me to the car to alert her. But by the time I did, the car was gone and I couldn't really give many details. My dad contacted the police again, but without a license plate, they weren't really able to do much. The last time I saw him wasn't until months later, near the very end of the school year. I was walking home with a big group of kids that lived in my neighborhood, and then he drove by us and slowed the car down to try and talk to us. I recognized his face immediately, and I alerted the other kids to start running. Luckily for us, we were only about 3 houses down from where one of my friends lived, and we all piled into her house, really concerning her parents significantly as we explained the situation. I don't think I ever saw him again after that. My dad had started dating my now stepmom, and we moved to her neighborhood and switched schools shortly after. I still sometimes think about him though. His face was actually in my dream a few nights ago, which actually reminded me to write about this experience. I'm in my 20s now, and to this day, I don't really know how he knew our names, or really how he knew anything about us. It's very freaking scary to think about what would have happened to my tiny little sister if she'd gotten in the car with that man, or what might have happened to me if I did. So to my childhood predator that tried to kidnap me and my sister, I'm really glad you didn't succeed. Between the ages of 4 and 12 years old, I was friends with a boy named Jack. Jack was always a bit of a strange kid, but being my neighbor, he was my best friend in life. Me and Jack used to play out every day, whether it was football, going to the park, or even tagging the street with the other kids in our street. You name it, we did it. One weekend during the summer, we were around 8 years old, and it was a scorching hot day, and 2 of the kids in our street were having a water fight. Having some water guns in our shed, I thought it would be a great idea to fill one up and join in. So as the day goes on, we're having a pretty great time, and a few other kids had joined in with their water guns as well. This is when Jack comes out with one of those insulated flasks that you keep water and drinks warm all day long, and then he hurls this flask. I'm pretty sure that he intended to throw the water, but it was full to the brim and it proved too heavy for him to keep hold of, and the water and flask fell to the pavement. Steam was instantly raising just a few feet from me and another one of the kids. Jack's mom came rushing out of her house and then she screamed at Jack, telling him to go inside. Being only 8 years old, I didn't really realize just how serious this was. A couple of years later, me and Jack went to our local park. We got to the park and Jack then asked me if I wanted to see something cool. He then pulled out a BB gun, and a good one at that. Jack then said that he got it off of his dad, who said that he could shoot cans with it. But when me and Jack went into the forest right behind the park, Jack then started firing it at random kids who were also playing in the forest. I told him to stop a few times, but he told me to stop being boring and just continued with this crazy behavior. I then made my way home where Jack would follow me, shooting at me every so often, actually hitting me in the shins a few times. I told Jack to grow up, and then I told him that I didn't want to hang out with him anymore, in school or after school. I continued to see Jack in school, who would creepily smile at me. He would also make slices across his throat with his finger whenever he saw me. And one day when I was in my garden with my cousin, Jack was in his bedroom window with a tie, and he made a noose gesture with it, then pointed at me and my cousin before sinisterly smiling at us. Jack became very odd, and with our houses being attached and us unfortunately having the same back bedrooms, I would always hear him hysterically laughing at night, and would hear bangs on the wall at stupid hours in the night. Shortly after I turned 11 years old, Jack and his family finally moved away, and life was then peaceful. I continued to grow up and live out my mid-late teens with really great friends. Jack eventually became just a distant memory as I lived out my teens and then moved away for university. I'm now 22 years old. When I visited home this past summer, my parents had informed me that Jack had been admitted to a mental institution after he attempted to kill his parents, and he had apparently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This absolutely shocked me, and I really didn't quite know what to say. But these events did come flashing back to me when I recalled these events. My dad had actually told me that the incident with the water fight was actually pretty serious. Jack had attempted to throw boiling hot water at me and my friend that day, and we really could have been seriously hurt. So Jack, I really hope you get the help you need in your institution. But please, just please stay away from me for the rest of my life. So I'm a 24-year-old female. The story happened to me when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. So my best friend went to school in the opposite direction as mine, but we rode the same bus up until high school. We also had a boy who also got on our bus and went to my school. Every day my friend would sit with me until she got off, then I would lay down in the seat or move to the edge because like clockwork, he would run to my seat and always try and sit with me. Now, this is where it gets weird. He would always show me his underwear and want me to touch him. I mean, sometimes it was just the innocent hug, but other times it wasn't. Now fast forward to last year, which was 2018. I had my daughter with my high school love, and we were so happy and really in love. One day I check my email like any stay-at-home mother does, and I see a weird email.
Hey, how are you doing? It's so-and-so.
Not really thinking much of it, I decide to reply to him because, hey, we're adults now, and people change. At first, it was really just simple talk. How are you? What's up with life? Yada yada yada. Then after about a week, that's when it got really weird.
Do you still live in your house with your family? Are you happy with your boy? Is this your phone number?
He actually got my phone number. Then he started calling me and texting me. Now, before anyone freaks out, I did tell my family and boyfriend all about this. And at first, they probably said it was okay and not to really worry. But after getting my number, it got pretty scary. Since we grew up together and I still live in the same house and I was a stay-at-home mom to a young premature baby, I felt very unsafe. My mother and boyfriend ended up messaging him and telling him to leave me alone as it was getting really uncomfortable for me, but that didn't stop him. After about a week and a half of him constantly messaging me and also making multiple Facebook accounts, we threatened him with going to the police and I blocked him on everything before it got worse. It was really quiet for a really long time. That is, until I saw another message from him a few weeks ago. I didn't open it and I pretty much instantly deleted it. I really don't know what his intentions were, but I'm really glad I didn't find out. It's pretty insane to me that even after all this time, he's still the very same creep that he was when we were kids. It's pretty wild. Back in 1998 or 99, I was around 5 or 6 years old and living in a crime and drug-ridden part of the downtown area. Our house had a giant backyard that was full of thick jungle-like trees and bushes that had been taken over by the earth and also random passerbys. We knew this due to the heroin needles that were around, and half of a mattress that had once been on the forest floor that had since grown 15 feet into the air with the trees. There was also a path that people would use as a shortcut to the main road, so there was a lot of traffic with shady people passing through. When you're a kid, this is a nightmare of a backyard, so I was pretty spooked since the time we moved in. I would complain constantly to my mom about someone watching me from outside my window when I would try to sleep. Once or twice there had been a few times of him watching me, and he had shined a flashlight in my room, and I saw a flash of his face, which I can still picture to this day. His really dark eyes burned through me, and for a while I never said anything, but I eventually told someone. My mom had always said that it was just a nightmare, and pretty much just brushed it off for about a week or two, while pretty much just ignoring my relentless complaints. Eventually, after having to fight with me to go to sleep one night, the next morning my mom had dragged me outside to try and prove me wrong. We went outside my window, and to her surprise, the grass had been stomped on only outside of my window, to the point that the grass was almost dead and only mud remained. There was also a ton of scratch marks from some kind of tool outside the window, as if someone was trying to break in. I was in a basement with one of those really small windows that don't really open, so breaking in through there is super unlikely, but it still really shook my family. My mom was absolutely horrified, and we started making plans to move out immediately. But growing up, we were really broke, so leaving right away was not really an option for us. Around that same time, me and my best friend, who was also my next door neighbor, had become inseparable. We had hung out almost constantly and had no real sense of danger, and would do really dumb things like go to other neighbors' houses and ask for candy. Our favorite neighbor was this elderly lady who always had hostess cakes for us, and we would actually go inside her house and hang out there. She was unbelievably nice and really took care of us in a way. Our parents had no idea that we did this, but it was our little secret. One day we were playing around the neighborhood and my mom yelled for me to come home so that we could go pick up dinner just around the corner. We were only gone for about 15 minutes at most, and when we came back to the house, we were in complete shock. The street was closed off with crime scene tape. There were 2 or 3 news station vans, a dozen police cars, and a news helicopter. While we were gone getting our food, a man who was not from the neighborhood but had been staying with his mom for the last few weeks had walked past my best friend's yard and saw her on the phone. She was talking to a friend and making faces, or whatever young kids do, and this man thought that she was making fun of him and talking about him on the phone. This man got so upset at the thought of someone making fun of him that he walked back to his mom's house and then came back with a butcher knife, planning to kill this girl for mistreating him. Because of where she was sitting on the porch, she could see him coming back with the knife and then ran inside the home and locked herself in the bathroom. Then she called the police with the phone that she already luckily had in her hand. My friend's mom was unfortunately in the kitchen, and she was not as lucky. The man took his anger out on her mother and stabbed her so many times that I can't even remember the number, but I think it was in the 20s. Somehow, after the amount of times that her mother was stabbed, she actually survived and made a full recovery after many surgeries. After his arrest, the story was all over the news. I remember watching it with my mom pretty religiously, just to make sure that my friend's mom was alright. They posted the man's mugshot, and I remember the most intense amount of fear flowing through me. The man who stabbed this woman was the very same man who was watching me outside my window. I later found out that we had met this man weeks earlier at the elderly lady's house that we frequented for candy. It was her son. He had initially met us at her house, and I guess he was keeping an eye on us ever since. He had only gotten out of prison about a month or so earlier, and I guess he was staying with her since his release. I never took note of him when we first met, but maybe if I did, we would have known right away who my Night Stalker was, and we could have prevented all that happened afterwards. We never did end up moving. My mom figured the danger was gone, so we stayed another year. To this day, I never ever sleep with the blinds open. To the creep who would watch me sleep through my window and try to murder my friend and her mom, I really pray and hope that we never meet and you're rotting in jail somewhere. You really deserve nothing less. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, rumors had spread around my school about this creepy guy called Martin who would hang outside asking to talk to kids. Someone told me that Martin had been asking about me and said that he knew my dad. At the time, I really just brushed it off because a lot of kids at school really bullied me and I thought that they were just messing with me. But I was still kind of scared about it. I decided to ask my dad if he knew anyone called Martin, and he said that he worked with a guy with that name who was quite strange. So I started to feel really nervous about it. Being a clueless kid, I didn't really think to tell my parents why I was asking about someone called Martin. I just kept the whole thing to myself. This story has always stayed with me because it also marked the first time that I ever said the F word. My friend and I were hanging around the playground after school, and we were talking about Martin and getting more and more scared about it. She said that we should yell "F you Martin" at the top of our lungs in an attempt to ward him off, so we decided to do just that. This all happened in the mid-90s, but there was a really strange development about 5 or 6 years ago. My parents ran into my dad's old workmate Martin, who was living in a halfway house in the same suburb as them. My dad felt sorry for him and he decided to give him some money. I remembered the story from my childhood and finally brought it up to him. And he said that Martin told him that he wasn't allowed to be around anyone that's under 18, which means that he was likely arrested on some kind of sexual assault charge. Just hearing this made the whole thing so much more chilling. I now firmly believe that Martin had heard my dad talking about me at his work, and he knew what school I went to, and was potentially trying to abduct me or something. Later on, when my dad had moved houses after my mother died, Martin went by his old house looking for him and trying to get some more money. His tenants called him and he told them not to give them his number or new address, and I'm really glad. Hopefully we won't have to see Martin ever again. I'm not really sure how old I was, but I was really small, maybe around 6. I was with a bunch of people from my church and having a barbecue at a river. All of the kids were swimming in the water. I didn't really know how to swim yet, so I was just staying waist deep near the shallow part. At some point, this girl came up to me and was playing with me. We were splashing each other and stuff. The weird thing was that she was probably about 13 or so, and I didn't really know who she was, even though I knew everyone else there. Apparently, no one was paying attention to us. She started pushing me out deeper and deeper to where I couldn't touch. She just kept laughing the whole time. My head kept going underwater. I tried grabbing onto her arms whenever she would push me, but she easily knocked my grip loose. The slight current slowly pulled me away from all of my family and friends while I struggled to tread the water. I was panicking, but she wouldn't stop pushing me, and she just kept laughing. I could not possibly have looked like I was having any fun. I would try to yell, but I was really only ever above water just long enough to take a breath. Every time my feet touched the mud for a split second, she would just push me down yet again. I couldn't believe that she was laughing. I was sure that I was going to drown. No one seemed to notice. Of all of the people to intervene, it would happen to be my childhood bully named Zachary. He had always been a jerk to me, mentally and physically abusive, but I still feel like that day he saved my life. He then came up to me and then he told her to get away from me. He grabbed me by the arm and then he pulled me up to where I could stand up again. Then he ran off and continued to play with the other kids his age, as if nothing ever happened. The girl was also already long gone as well. I went on playing, and as with so many other things, I don't think I ever told anyone this story until I was much older. I'm pretty sure I never saw that girl again, but I still don't know what to think. Was she actually trying to drown me, or was she just kidding around? I guess I'll never know. But I'm still very grateful that Zachary saved my life that day. I really don't know why he did it because, like I said, He was my bully, but thank God he did.